Well, hello, everybody. I just wanted to take a minute. Our next speaker who's going to be here today, this is a good interactive space. We just had Bruce come and talk to us about kind of how our industrial military complex is, oh, thank you, giving us a good direction of how to look for change. And what I've noticed, at least in my own world, is that when you know something's there and you know that you have to change it, I end up hitting this wall because inevitably it has to do with a power dynamic, and I have this like internal anxiety that goes, and I don't know how to articulate what I really want to say to the person standing in front of me. So when we found out that Bruce was going to be here, one of the things that we had talked about was we need to have somebody come in who has that language, who has that ability to be able to articulate those spaces in us that can be really vulnerable, and especially when we need to say something that's our own truth. And I'm really excited to have Richard Smith here today to be able to do that. So thank you so much for coming and rocking the house and having such amazing tools. And I'm going to give you this, and thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Okay. Ooh. Wow. Are there people? Yes, there are people out there, yes. Yes. So there are times, well, first of all, let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Richard Smith, and I'm the director of Human Craft. And I started Human Craft about 1996 as a way for people to, first of all, embrace their own humanity and to recognize their own magnificence, and then be able to take that out into the communities that they are in, whether it's just a one-on-one relationship or work or soul food or making a difference in the world. And early on, I realized that one of the biggest difficulties we have is when I have something really important to say and there's an emotional, okay, there's some emotional charge in it. Sometimes it's really hard for me to language it in such a way that at the end of the conversation, the other person is still listening. It's real easy to go in guns a-blazing, and after about 3 or 4 words, a person's eyes are glazing over and they're gone. So I developed a way to sort of help people through things like that. First of all, help myself through it. So I sort of took it out and practiced it. So I can't guarantee it'll work all the time, but it's a great place to start. And one of the things that is so very important about communicating something that's important to me when there's an emotional hook in it is, first of all, slowing down. Stop and think about, what is my intention? What's the end result I want? And to recognize at the same time that there's a person over there with their own intention. And how do I let them know that I'm listening to them? Because that's where it'll happen. That's where the change will occur. All of us, every time someone's done a survey about what is the thing that makes you feel loved and cared for, it's always been when I feel seen and heard. And so especially when there's an emotionally charged conversation, I want that person to be there at the end of what I have to say, but I also want to hear what they have to say. Someplace in there, there may be a middle ground. If I'm so hung up on my own agenda that I'm not listening to them, they're not going to be listening to me. I also want to model the behavior I want to see in them. So there are some skills I put together that will sort of help, some sort of basic guidelines to setting up a communication that works. So the first thing is to figure, is this the best time to do this? Did you ever try to have a conversation on the fly with somebody? There's something really important I wanted to say, and they're walking out the door, and you're sort of walking with them as they're going to their car? Listening's probably not occurring at that point in time. I know I'm not listening if I've already got something else on my mind. So it's about setting up an opportunity and an appointment, actually making an appointment. I've got something really important I want to say to you. What's a good time to have this conversation? Person may say, what happens if the person says, well, this isn't a good time? That's a question for you guys.
When would be a good time?
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
How about next Tuesday?
Oh, well, well, maybe.
What's your schedule look like in the next 2 days?
Yeah, just like that. What that says is, I'm not going away. This is really important.
I'm not ashamed.
Yeah, I know. Thank you, though. This is really important, but it's so important to me that I'm going to keep asking you what's the best time for you until you pick a time. That's how important it is. So the next thing to ask yourself is, am I in the frame of mind to communicate this thing clearly? Sometimes I know that I'm so emotional about something right now, I'm probably not going to communicate what I need to say as clearly as I possibly could, and I'm probably not going to be listening very well. So again, I want to ask myself, am I in the good space to have this conversation? Is this the time and place for me to do that? The next thing is, have I gotten clear on my intention, and have I communicated to the person I'm going to talk to? And why do we want to do that? First of all, why do I want to get clear about my intention? Exactly, yeah. I want to be able to clearly speak my truth, and I first have to get clear about that myself. Again, that's why that slow down process is so important. If I stop and center myself and think about what is the end result I want, what is my intention, it's a good starting place. And then why do I want to communicate that to the person I'm talking to? Let me ask you this question. Have you ever had a conversation with someone, about halfway through the conversation you're going, where are they going with this? So hopefully, if I have a clear intention and I communicate it to the person I'm going to talk to, they all of a sudden are a partner with. They know where I want to go. I've sort of set the stage. We're kind of on the same page. So now at least I have a better chance of us sort of ending up at the same place at the same time, rather than having to play catch up. Because if I don't know where someone's going with a conversation, I'm playing catch up, probably through half of the conversation. Yes?
Do you think you should get your buy-in, their buy-in, by asking them, do you want to talk about what I want to tell you?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. Yeah, you want to get there. Is this a good time to talk? I've got something important I want to talk to you about. This is the subject matter.
And then they can say no.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to talk about it. Exactly, because they may. I said there are no guarantees. This is about doing the best thing we can do to sort of condition the listening on the other side, but there aren't any guarantees that they're always going to want to listen to my point of view or what I want to talk about today. They may not be in a good space, but they may say, how about next week? So again, these are just steps we can take as individuals to sort of help that process along. I wish I could guarantee you that it'd work all the time. But again, I can just be the best person I can be in this situation and do the best work I can do in this situation and hope that that other person comes along. The next thing I want to ask myself, am I willing to be silent during that conversation? Did you ever notice in the course of a conversation, all of a sudden there's this sort of silent place where someone's thinking about something? And did you ever notice the tendency to want to fill that up with something? Yeah. I have. It was one of the biggest learnings for me. It was just sit in the silence for a while and let that person process the information that they had for a while. And I noticed when I did that their response back was much more meaningful and much more powerful because they had a chance to think about it. And when they do that for me, it allows me that opportunity to go, how do I really feel about this? What do I really want to say next? A lot of communication, and I was I'm going to share a little story that one of my best friends years and years ago, when I back in Connecticut, whose opinion I valued greatly, told me that I didn't listen worth a damn. And at that moment in time, it wasn't my favorite thing to hear. But I was sure glad that she said it, because I got to look at, what do I need to do to help this relationship with this person? And she was actually kind enough to point out what it looked like when I did it. And that's where a lot of this came out of. So there's that part of sitting in the silence, being willing to just let things generate in that space, let things generate in that emptiness for a while. It is a skill I constantly work on. Some days I do it well, some days it's horrible. Then the next thing I want to ask is, am I willing to be an active listener? Am I the kind of person that just sort of sits there, maybe nods their head once in a while? Or am I using the skill, like, paraphrasing back to that person what I thought they heard, checking out my observation with them to be clear through the whole process, waiting till, instead of like at the end going like, well, back here you said this, and they're like, oh no, this is what I really meant was this. And now we've got to backtrack to that spot where I branched off instead of start all over again. So there's a lot of, probably one of the best active listening tools I've ever had was just that kind of paraphrase back. I thought I heard you say this, is that true? Takes about, 3 seconds? And I've never had anybody give me a hard time for doing it. It's actually a pretty respectful thing to do. This is one of my favorites. Am I being accountable and using accountable language? Does anybody know what accountable language is? Or where it comes from? I don't think it was there. Where'd that come from? Oh, thank you. Yeah, actually, what it is, I'm taking responsibility for my feelings, my actions, my interpretations, all of that. So accountable language has very few you statements in it. Good example. Which one of these is easier to listen to? It's pretty obvious, but I'm going to do it anyway. When you were late the other day, you really made me angry. Or when you were late the other day, I noticed I got angry. Obviously, that second one's, yeah. There's no blame, there's no shame. There's nothing to defend. It's just, I'm saying this is how I felt about something you did. Still opens the place up for conversation. Very important tool to use. When it's not used, it feels pretty yucky. I don't know if you've ever been on the receiving end of that. Do you ever notice when a person's talking to you about themselves, but they're using you statements the whole time? Well, when you're really angry at somebody and you want to really get back at them, and because they really pissed you off, and you really want to hurt them, and you talking to me? It's that taking ownership. It keeps it cleaner. It keeps it straighter. And it's a much more powerful place to stand and speak from. Because if I'm accountable for my life and I don't like the way it looks, who gets to change it? I do. So not using accountable language is kind of a victim kind of place to hang out in. And I sure don't like it. What that brings me to is I was thinking about kind of power words the other day. Words that people just have trouble with sometimes, and one of them is no. Hearing the word no. Some people have a lot of trouble hearing the word no. Some people have a lot of trouble saying the word no. Did you ever notice somebody might ask you to do something? Oh, I've noticed this. Somebody asked me to do something, and I'm saying no in my head, and between here and here, yes comes out. I don't want to hurt their feelings. I've got all this stuff going on about taking care of them. And so I found all sorts of creative ways to say no. One of them is that, that really doesn't work for me. Or I'm really not willing to. for some reason, it doesn't have the same impact. It says the same thing, but I think no's kind of gets stuck when we're about this big when we hear this. No. Yes. I don't want to. It's another great. Yeah, I don't want to is great. It's if that's your truth, it's a great thing to say. Sometimes we have trouble with that one again. But again, the whole idea is to be able to speak our truth and to do it in such a way that the relationship stays whole at the end of the conversation. Or at least there's some room to repair it if it isn't. The word but. It's an amazing word. It's about this long, but it erases everything we said before it. So learning to substitute and. She said, and I use it at work a lot, like I really like what you did here, and it's not okay that you were late today. Rather than I really like what you did here, but it's not okay. All of a sudden, this is like, but has this kind of it's almost like butting heads. There's this impact to it. And again, it's a word that takes practice to stop using. There aren't too many places I actually need to use it anymore. Except when I'm talking about sitting down. How does it feel when people say things like, you need to, you should, you ought to, you know what you need to do? You really need to check out this, or you really need to go to this workshop, or you really need to talk to a therapist. How does that feel? Yeah, me too. Yeah. Exactly, yeah. Exactly. So some of the things that I find work really well to replace those, I would like you to. You might want to think about anything that gives the other person choice. Anything that, yes.
Also, have you thought about
Yeah, that's another great one. Thank you.
a question?
Mhm. Also, anytime, great, thank you for saying that question, because anytime you can ask a question of someone rather than give them advice or tell them something, you've said a number of things. Number one, I think you're smart enough to figure this out for yourself. I have confidence in you. Secondly, I just want you to have control of your own life. That's a choice. A question is just a choice. What do you want to do about this? What do you think you want to do here? Or as my great friend Larry would say, what would a warrior do? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. There's a much broader place to draw from. And the answers come a lot quicker that way. When I don't give advice, I try not to give advice even when people ask me for advice, which irritates the heck out of some people. Because I'll ask them, what do you think you want to do? Probably the worst thing I do nowadays is I sort of give options. I've tried this, this, and this, and some of these have worked for me. Do you think some of those might work for you? How about, am I working at listening for another person's language and using it with them? Interesting concept. We all process information different ways. Some of us are visual, some of us are auditory, some of us are kinesthetic or sensory. And if we're using different ones with each other, if I'm not listening for how you use the language and trying to get on your map, it'll take a lot longer for us to communicate. If you say things like, I see what you mean, looks good to me, it gives me a clue that you're a visual person. And if I start using visual language with you, your brain doesn't need to sort out what I'm saying and translate it. It's much more an instant connection. A therapist friend of mine had 2 clients working on the same issues. One of them got through her therapy in about 3 months. And we were talking one day, he says, I'm struggling with this one client because she's struggling and struggling and struggling, and I can't seem to help her get there. And I said, have you been listening for the kind of language she uses? And he was a very kinesthetic, sensory kind of guy, and he was always saying, how does that feel for you? And she was like way up here on the visual. So instead of asking her to get a feeling around it, he started asking her to make pictures about it. What does that look like to you? Can you make a picture of that memory? And bingo. In about 2 more months, she had completed that piece of therapy, and she was on her way. When somebody brought this to my attention, it was just like, whoa, like a big light went on. So it's about, again, it's about listening. Listening for what that other person's saying, how they're using the language. One of my staff people I inherited years ago when I was managing an awning company, the company was getting ready to fire him. He was always arguing with his coworkers. He was a big burly guy. I would take him out his job assignments for the week, and he would give me a hard time about he'd never had enough time to do it and all this. And I'd walk up to him and I'd go like, I really need you to do this week. This is important. We have a tough schedule to do. And then I began to listen to him. And every Monday morning when I went out to check on how my guys did over the weekend, he would go like, well, I helped my friend move, or my ex-girlfriend's car broke down and I went and helped her, and I helped a friend of mine do this, and he loved helping people. So I began to ask him to help me every Monday morning when I took him his schedule. 6 months from the time they were going to fire him, we had our employee dinner for the year, and he made Employee of the Year. And there was not, I mean, I was crying, he was crying. It was a remarkable thing to see. I got a chance to help him keep his job. I got a chance to feel that I made a difference in somebody else's life. And all I did was listen to how he was using the language. We have 2 of these and 1 of these, and that's not an accident. Communication is 80% listening and 20% speaking and responding to what we've heard. And for a lot of us, myself included, I've got that reversed a good part of the time. And I'm still working on it. The next thing I want to state is to get clear about the facts in my interpretation of them. Human beings are interpretation machines. We get a piece of information. We pass it through our set of filters, which is based on our history. We decide what it means, and then we act on it. We forget a step. What step is that? That's a good step, but that's not the one I'm looking for. We forget to check out our interpretation and see if it's accurate. We forget to ask that person, I saw you do this. This is what I think it means. Is that true? Before we act on that interpretation, that's the step I'd like to add. They'll love you for it. No one's ever given me a hard time for asking the question. It's a respectful thing to do. And I don't have to go forward with false information. So it saves a lot of cleanup time for me. Because if I go running off thinking what I know you mean without being sure of it, there's a good chance I may be wrong. Because I'm not walking around in your, I'm not walking your walk. I'm not living your life. I don't know what you always mean. And it's arrogant of me to assume that I do. So that step alone has saved me an enormous amount of grief in my life. To just say, I see you're kind of, looks like you're frowning right now. Is something up with you? You okay? Is it something I did? Well, no. Okay, somebody just cut me off in traffic, and I'm still stressed out about that. Okay. Just a little check-in. We take in enormous amounts of information every day, and our brains process it automatically without us even thinking about it a lot of the time. And a lot of times we act on that information. And it is not always to our best interest or the people that we're in relationship with to do that without first checking it out. So just like any good detective, you get a clue, find out what that clue means before you move forward with it.
The way I like to say that, Richard, is in the absence of data, I let
Exactly. Yeah, really. Yes. Thanks, Peggy. Also want to look out for the nonverbal cues. So much communication is nonverbal. Matter of fact, most of it is. Again, you're going to see body language cues, people standing like this, and find out if what you think that means is true before you act on it. If you read most body language books, which I have a lot of trouble with personally, because I think they're generalized to predict what people are going to do, which you can't do because they're people. See somebody standing like this, what's it mean? Yeah, closed, unapproachable, guarded. Exactly. It is. A lot of times, it could be, I like to stand like this a lot, and people who know me know I'm pretty approachable. But this is just comfortable for me. So again, it's about making those assumptions, slowing down, taking the time to put some effort into our communication will improve our relationships. A lot. In our fast-paced society, there's always move, 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 move. The other thing is in relationship, texting, emailing, it's wonderful for meet me at 5 o'clock here, let's have dinner at this place. But for goodness sake, please don't try to talk about emotional issues on your computer or your phone, unless you're actually talking on your phone. There are phones. Because that is like the interpretation trap. It's just a bunch of words on a page. Because there's no voice inflection. There's no other person there that you see, their facial expressions. There's no energy going back and forth between us that we can feel. So again, it's in this age of I love the technology. I think it's wonderful for what it does. But there's a misuse of the technology, and I've seen people break up with their significant others via email, and I just want to hit them. And I'm a nonviolent person. It's not okay. It takes a lot of courage to stand with someone in the fire of an emotional thing going on and sit there and tell your truth. It takes a lot of courage for me to tell my truth when I'm upset or when I'm sad or when I'm angry. And yet when I do, life is grand and my friends stay my friends. And there's a lot less cleanup to do afterwards. So please don't assume. Check it out. People respect us when we do that. And remember that communication is 80% listening and 20% figuring out what I want to say next and doing that. And taking the time and taking a breath after that other person talks and sitting in the silence for a minute and then responding. Slow the process down. Energetically, it just feels better. It creates kind of a peace rather than that kind of almost adversarial kind of communication that we see a lot of the times out in our society. If you're standing in their truth, there's nothing to defend. Any questions? I think this might be useful. Okay, cool. I've got a little thing I'd like to share with you, and I've got handouts, I think, for just about everybody here. And I can't remember where this came to me, but I'm glad it did. And I've shared this before here, but a lot of you folks weren't here, so I get to do it again. It's called Please Just Listen. When I ask you to listen to me and you start giving advice, you have not done what I asked. When I ask you to listen to me and you begin to tell me why I shouldn't feel that way, you're trampling on my feelings. When I ask you to listen to me and you feel you have to solve my problems, you have failed me, as strange as that may seem. Listen. All I ask is that you listen, not talk or do, just hear. Advice is cheap. 75 cents will get you both Dear Abby and Billy Graham in the same newspaper. And I can do it myself. I'm not helpless. When you do something that I can do for myself, you contribute to my fear and inadequacy. But when you accept a simple fact that I do feel, no matter how irrational, then I quit trying to convince you and get about the business of understanding what's behind my irrational feelings. And when that's clear, the answers are obvious and I don't need advice. Irrational feelings make sense when you understand what's behind them. So please listen and just hear me. And if you want to talk, wait a minute for your turn and I'll listen to you. Thank you for listening to me.